This is AWANI Global with me, Nailah Huda. With the ASEAN Summit coming up end of this month, the world's attention turns to Kuala Lumpur and the regional bloc, especially in how they aim to navigate human rights issues both in their backyard and abroad. From Myanmar to Gaza, it's expected that the focus will shift towards these conflicts and humanitarian crises, much like what we've seen with other international and regional meetings from the UN General Assembly to BRICS and G20. And one signal perhaps that the region's approach to human rights issues is evolving is the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, or AICHR, preparing to adopt 2 landmark declarations at the ASEAN Summit end of this month. So to find out more about these landmark declarations and what AICHR is doing, we're very honoured to be joined by His Excellency Edmund Bon, Chair of AICHR, joining us online on AWANI Global today. Thank you so much, Edmund, for joining us today. I think before we go into the declarations, maybe we can sort of paint a picture, sort of go into the bigger picture question of human rights issues and how perhaps you might see this having some progress or how it's evolved in Southeast Asia. How has ASEAN been addressing these human rights issues in the past decade or so?
Thank you. The ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights was established in 2009. And I think in the beginning, ASEAN was a bit fearful of human rights. The representatives were debating how to go about it. And that was because really we didn't have a baseline human rights declaration. And only in 2012, we had the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration that spells out all of the civil political rights, the UDHR rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it adds value with 3 really important rights: the right to a safe, clean, healthy, sustainable environment, right to enjoy peace, and right to development. Recently, under Malaysia's leadership, we have been very concerted in trying to use human rights as a bridge building tool to make sure that we deal with the human rights violations in the region, make sure that we prevent conflict, make sure we use it to deal with conflict, as well as to really discuss very sensitive issues. This has been happening for some time, for a few years, but I think this year has been really stand out because the representatives, especially the 6 of us who are new, have started to bring a new dimension to how ASEAN looks at human rights. And there's, I think, a bit more comfort level in dealing with these issues because of the different maturity levels that have really progressed in the region. So I would say that the Commission has grown from strength to strength. Some people have criticized us, but that's maybe using a different lens. It may be using a Western lens. I think in Southeast Asia, we have been struggling, fighting for a greater protection of human rights, and we are taking it in the right direction.
You mentioned a lot of interesting points there that I do want you to elaborate a little bit on. But before that, I do also want to hear more about these landmark declarations that we can expect at the summit this month. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
AICHR was the one that negotiated and drafted the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration in 2012. Since then, AICHR has not led any other human rights declaration. More so, I think, because, as I mentioned, there have been misunderstandings or inability to come together on common positions. During our chairmanship this year, during our chairship this year, we said that we would like to complete negotiations on the right to a safe, clean, healthy, sustainable environment that has been in the pipeline for almost 3 years. So Malaysia has completed it. We are very proud of it. It's a very strong declaration. It may not be the best, but it is definitely the only second human rights declaration that ASEAN has taken on board in such a huge way, and we look forward to it. That deals with the right to everyone, right to the communities, right to protect the environment, make sure it's safe, make sure it's clean, deal with pollution, deal with indigenous people's rights, deal with freedom of information, public participation. So we are looking forward to adoption of that declaration on the 47 summit that's upcoming. There's a second declaration that Malaysia has proposed, and we have also completed negotiations. We're just waiting for some countries to officially endorse it. Hopefully by the 47th summit, again, it will be endorsed. This is a right to development and right to peace declaration towards realizing inclusive and sustainable development. That's in complete alignment with Malaysia's theme this year of inclusivity and sustainability.
How do you think this declaration can progress further, the kind of maturity that you were talking about in addressing the sort of shift in perception that ASEAN member states have towards human rights issues, especially in navigating the sensitivities around that? You know, with ASEAN, there's a lot of principles of non-interference, there's principles of consensus. How do you see the sort of balance with these principles and how ASEAN member states have always, you know, operated?
I don't see a contradiction. So the non-interference principle, the ASEAN way has always been how we operated. The declaration, and ASEAN adopts many declarations over the years, allows us to be more cooperative, provides a standard regional baseline, and then once we have that baseline, national governments are supposed to implement that baseline. We encourage them, we work with them to encourage to implement that baseline. And through a lot of meetings, through a lot of discussions, we say, hey, there may be some gaps here. Let's learn from each other. There may be some good practices here. Let's learn from each other. And now, more importantly, through the AICHR, we have been saying, look, there are some case studies that we need to look at. There's some scenario planning that we need to do because there are cases that keep coming up to the Commission. We have received something like 100 over communications, complaints on human rights since 2010. We have been dealing with it very actively. We are alive and we understand the problems of the people. So we are trying to do it in a way that respects the sovereignty of each member state. We don't interfere, but we say, hey, we receive a complaint. What do you think we should do? So if it's a Malaysian issue, I would take the complaint. I would take the case. I would then engage with my government, with the Malaysian government, with the agencies, with KDN, with Suhakam, with other bodies and say, please, could you share with us what do you think about this case? And we have done this year. We have done this for cases on freedom of peaceful assembly. We have done it on the environment. We are working on cases regarding statelessness and refugee rights. So I think there is no contradiction between the principle of non-interference and dealing with human rights violations. But the method, the way it's done, needs to be consultative and cooperative. And a declaration like one on the environment will allow us to embed that kind of common principles. And then when we have that common principles, we work together with other ASEAN member states in dealing with these cases that we receive.
Yeah, I want to go a little bit deeper into that, not just looking at about the balance that you have to strike with these different principles, and you seem to think there's no contradiction, but what about in terms of governance and in terms of these regulatory and justice system frameworks? There's, I'm sure, fragmentation across the region. How do you perhaps find this effort of harmonizing or creating this standard regional baseline, as you say, keeping in mind that there's this, you know, variety and diversity of regulatory systems and justice systems across the region?
So the understanding of, for example, the EU, they have a supra-national type of parliament where they have laws that apply to all their member states. ASEAN is a bit different. ASEAN is more like an association. While we try to align a lot of our principles, policies, and standards, we just make sure that we don't go below international human rights standards. As long as we don't go below international human rights standards, if those standards are then translated into practice, how they are operationalized in different contexts and on different countries will differ. So we will allow those countries to say, yeah, okay, this is how we implement it. We understand your national context. We understand your economic reasons. We understand your capacity. But so long as you don't drop below the international line. The international standard, the regional standard now, and now I can say with the declaration, there will be a regional standard on environmental rights. We must not drop below that line. And that line to me, in that declaration, is actually higher than international standards. So when we operationalize it, we help each other to operationalize it. But we cannot really compare ourselves with other regions like Africa and Europe, where there is a court, and say, yes, you need to harmonize, you need to make sure all are the same. And when there's a violation, go to the court and get a court judgment. ASEAN at the moment has no court. So we cannot compare our regions. We can see how it works that side. But the Commission has mandate and powers to provide recommendations. And we have provided recommendation. An example is the recommendation to Myanmar on the situation of the earthquakes, the 5-point consensus, as well as the Myanmar coup.
On that point, you bring me to my next point. Of course, there'll be a lot of attention focused towards the Myanmar crisis as well. What the process or the progress has been like with how ASEAN has been dealing with that. How do you think AICHR looks at this crisis, and how do you think the conversation surrounding it will be like with the ASEAN summit this year?
First of all, I need to say that AICHR is probably one of those bodies that meet so regularly. This year, we have met, I think, 6 times. We've met 5 times. We're going to meet the 6th time. And then we have something like 20, 30 activities a year. So we meet each other regularly. I can tell you that for every meeting, myself and some of the other representatives always raise the issue of Myanmar. The implementation of the 5PC, humanitarian aid, dealing with going back to normalcy and supporting a long-lasting, durable peace. When we talk about it, we would then receive responses from Myanmar and maybe other representatives, and then make recommendations as to what can be taken up. Some of these are in writing, some of these are verbal, but we have a situation of discussing how it can be implemented. At this point in time, Myanmar is an extremely complex situation. It's being dealt with by the leaders. The issue is whether ASEAN will support the elections, which may not be inclusive. And I think Malaysia, our foreign minister, has already taken a position. It's quite clear that we will be careful in wanting to support such position. But the advocacy, the diplomacy to deal with the issue of Myanmar has to continue. We have a special envoy of the ASEAN chair to deal with it. But I'm saying that is for the Commission, it provides a platform to discuss this sensitive issue. Look at the other extreme. We've talked about the responsibility to protect principle. It has 3 pillars. One of the pillars is military intervention. And I know nobody wants that. ASEAN will not want that. No ASEAN member state will put their boots on the ground and go in without the consent of that government, whether it's a military government or whether it's a civilian government. But when the government says, I need aid, I need humanitarian support, and Malaysia has sent our people there, Singapore and a few other countries have sent post the earthquake, that is another way of showing support. But and that also came with the ceasefire, which was a good thing. So there's no quick fix answer. This issue of Myanmar has been a festering issue for many, many years. It's been an issue that ASEAN has to deal with. But moving ahead, I think we see progress, because even at the Commission, when it was very sensitive to talk about Myanmar long time ago, we made statements in 2018 about the issue of the Rohingya refugees.
Just quickly on that note of the case of Myanmar, these mechanisms or these channels of dialogue and negotiations and discussions, do you think these are sufficient, or do you think there are other avenues to be explored?
ASEAN 2045 calls for a strengthened ASEAN, enhanced ASEAN. We need enhanced mechanisms. And the promise Malaysia made, my part in the sense of as a representative of Malaysia on the AICHR, last year, I recall, is that we are looking at peace and conflict prevention. This year, we have started with a lot of workshops, many workshops. There's one continuing next 2 weeks on peace. I think we need to enhance ASEAN's conflict prevention and peace building mechanism. we do not have a mechanism that allows a full ASEAN-led, ASEAN-owned whole of ASEAN approach. A lot of times it relies on the good faith and the good officers of the ASEAN chair, in this case, Malaysia. So what we are looking at the Commission is, do we need an ASEAN template? So when there's an issue of the Cambodia-Thailand conflict, for example, when there's an issue of intrastate, interstate, an issue of South China Sea comes up, what are the steps that member states can or should take in that mechanism? So if you ask me, I think, yes, we need a mechanism. We are working on it, but I cannot work on it in 1 year. We started the workshops early this year, but I think it needs a lot more time. We are gathering a lot of experts, and we need to flesh out the details. We need to learn from the past. We need to learn on Cyclone Nagis, what has happened in Myanmar. We learn from southern Thailand, Aceh, Mindanao, Marawi, Timor-Leste, Cambodia. All these issues of conflict need to be documented, and then we learn from it and decide how to put it in practice. How do we put it in human rights, diplomatic practices for ASEAN?
On that note of peace building and conflict resolution, you mentioned the Thailand and Cambodia border dispute among other issues, but just to talk about that quickly, we did see the US involvement in that, in the sort of ceasefire that was achieved quite ceremonially, and of course President Trump claiming it as a win in his effort to get a Nobel Peace Prize, I'm assuming. What kind of signal do you think that sends?
I don't want to talk about Trump and the US. I want to look at it as an ASEAN-led, ASEAN-owned approach. The ASEAN chair, Malaysia, and in this case, our Prime Minister, Datuk Seri Anwar, and our Foreign Minister, Tok Mat, they were the ones that said, hey, let's do a mediation. And the thing is, both Thailand and Cambodia have a lot of trust in Malaysia as mediator, as someone that can, as a country that can lead, as also as the ASEAN chair. So I see this as success for Malaysia, but that's only the first step, getting the ceasefire. Malaysia also now leads the issue of how we implement the ceasefire, and there are some conditions to the ceasefire about dealing with the online scam issues, moving heavy artillery. So we look forward to steps. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Malaysia, has been negotiating very much. And I don't want to comment about it very much because we have not reached the end.
Yeah.
But I really, really hope that we can come to some sort of long-lasting settlement. But what I want to say, and I can say from the Commission itself, is that we have discussed it. Cambodia and Thailand, respectively, have been sending communications to the Commission, AICHR, to me, addressed as the chair, and I have been speaking to Cambodia and Thailand in full consultation with their ministries and my ministry, as well as sharing it with others and say, in essence, hey, there is this problem, there are some recommendations, what do we do about it? And we just spoke about it at the last meeting. Of course, a lot of it depends on what Cambodia and Thailand wants to do. Both of them seem to be taking different approaches. And at the moment, it will be for us, incumbent on Malaysia, to mediate those approaches and look forward to peaceful settlement of the dispute.
Just quickly on that, how contingent do you think efforts of peace building and conflict resolution, the sort of maturity, as you said, to address sensitive human rights issues, how contingent is that on the leadership, the chairmanship of ASEAN and AICHR as well?
ASEAN has been quite successful, if not one of the most successful regions in preventing conflicts. A lot of the conflicts that arise are actually intrastate. So you see around us issues that have come up really within that state. And so then the non-interference principles apply a bit more because the state then says, please don't interfere with us. But when it spills over, when there's a regional peace that is threatened, like Malaysia has many refugees from Myanmar, then it becomes an ASEAN issue. So I still keep going back to the issue of here our practice has been rely on the chair. I'm saying, yes, rely on the chair, and that's in the ASEAN Charter, but relying on the chair is not enough. We need a template at a working level rather than a ad hoc process that comes and goes whenever there's a conflict, and then someone rushes to say, okay, let's have this process.
Yeah.
Because the ASEAN chair may have different views, and different successive ASEAN chairs may have different approaches. So I'm saying, let's have an ASEAN mechanism, and AICHR is actually working on it. And to work on it, AICHR provides a safe and constructive platform to discuss this issue. So when people say, oh, AICHR doesn't discuss this issue, AICHR doesn't protect human rights, AICHR doesn't respond, I think that's wrong. Nobody knows what's going on in the commission. Of course, we keep a lot of our discussions confidential because it's some quite emotional discussions. Yeah. But I can say publicly that we discussed this very robustly in the commission.
Now, I want to move beyond issues in our backyard to some issues beyond. What are some of the factors that inform AICHR's decision to address international issues beyond ASEAN? For example, the conflict in Gaza, of course.
The conflict in Gaza has been raised by Malaysia, by myself, in at least 3 of our statements. Yes, I think. And the last recent statement was one of the strongest. I've called it a genocide. I've called on all ASEAN member states to take the appropriate action, including the necessary measures like boycotting, sanctions, because we have, of course, some ASEAN member states that are a bit more reluctant. So we leave it again to some of the different member states to decide what they want to do. AICHR, unfortunately, is limited in a certain way. We cannot directly intervene because we are dealing with the 10 and now 11 country coming up in the summit, Timor-Leste. Gaza, of course, is quite far away, but we have been using bilaterally our good officers, some of us, to engage and cooperate with organizations like the OIC and other international bodies like the UN to raise voices against the genocide. I, for one, will say that, I'm trying my best. People don't see it, but I definitely do not want genocide and blood on our hands.
Now, we are coming towards the end, but just some of your general thoughts and expectations from the ASEAN summit this month. Of course, as you said, you don't want to talk about President Trump, but unfortunately, I think he might be the star of the show. The limelight might unfortunately focus on, world leaders such as himself, as opposed to the hard work that's being done by ASEAN member states and AICHR as well. Just what do you think? Will human rights issues take center stage, much like it has with other international meetings, UN General Assembly, issues of Gaza and Myanmar taking center stage? Do you think that's rightly so?
All I will say is at the commission, when President Trump took office recently again, there is almost, I can say, substantial withdrawal of American support, American discourse on human rights in ASEAN. And I'm very sad because there is a lot of important aid that US agencies provide to people who need them, like on food, on health, also to the commission. So I will just say that if they want to become irrelevant to Southeast Asia and ASEAN, then that is their decision. I will not want to bet my dollar on them coming back, but just look ahead. We will be ASEAN-led, ASEAN-owned. We will rely on how we have been working, and the vacuum that America leaves on human rights in Southeast Asia is felt, but also the vacuum is now being filled by countries that were traditionally not active. China, not as active. Australia, the EU, everybody wants to come to ASEAN. ASEAN is the talk of the global stage. ASEAN is in a sense very attractive for a lot of people, or a lot of countries that want to make friends with us. So I'm is something that I take seriously, but for relevance to the Commission at the moment, I will just say that we will continue with our work. We will continue to promote and protect human rights, and we will continue to defend the interests of not only Malaysia, but ASEAN's interests on human rights and on democratic values.
Just final thoughts. One more thing I want to get your thoughts on. If you had to describe Malaysia's chairmanship of ASEAN and AICHR in this past year.
We have been inclusive, very inclusive. We have had civil society participation in almost every program that we have done, including on our firework plans, our priority programs. This has never been done before. You can ask civil society, ask them what Malaysia has been trying to do. We've been very inclusive. We've also been very, in a sense, for substantive matters, sustainable. The two declarations I mentioned supports our sustainability measures. But I think we've been also very forward-looking. The 2045 vision that Malaysia led in the negotiations adopted at the last summit talks about a vision for people-centered ASEAN. We cannot ignore issues that are real and issues that affect the most vulnerable and marginalized people on the ground.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Plenty to look forward to, of course, at the ASEAN Summit end of this month, and perhaps we'll need to follow up after and see what the reception is like with the declaration or declarations. We'll have to see. Thank you so much once again to His Excellency Edmund Bon, Chair of AICHR, for sharing some of his thoughts on what AICHR has been doing in the past year with Malaysia's chairmanship of ASEAN. That is all on AWANI Global at this hour. We'll see you again.